Thank you so much for everyone. A very good evening to all of you for joining the Baithak today. Baithak has been running for over a year. We've had more than 40 such sessions. But today is particularly important because we have invited Professor Ahmed to speak about his book, the first version or the first installment, so to say, of which had come in 2014. And very recently, he's brought out the the updated version of the same discussion. And I think everybody at TheDaak felt that this is a conversation which is very important to contemporary India in this present context. And he agreed, so we're very thankful. Uh, he needs no introduction, but I will go ahead and speak a little bit about the title of the book and of the speaker today. The title of the book is Muslim Political Discourse in Postcolonial India, Monuments, Memory, and Contestation. The book explores the process of monumentalization of Indo-Islamic historical places and their making as political sites in contemporary India, situating these within the Muslim political discourse. And there's a very interesting way in which he speaks of the Muslim political discourse, which hopefully some of us who've read the book would have gotten a sense of. And I'm sure Sir would speak of it today. It studies the process through which various monuments, such as the Jama Masjid in Delhi and the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya, became political sites, quote unquote, many decades after independence, and the modes by which a memory of a royal Muslim past was articulated for political mobilization. It analyzes the history of these archaeological monuments, their function, their status as living memories and as heritage, emerging Muslim religiosities, and the internal configurations of Muslim politics in India. In this new edition, this this particular edition that has come out in 2025 explores the aftermath of the Supreme Court verdict of the Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi land title dispute and the Hindutva politics of heritage, which is now raising critical questions such as whether Muslim responses to political questions are homogeneous. And the book will greatly interest researchers and students of political science, Indian history, sociology, as well as any general reader of who's interested in the lives and the life worlds of contemporary India. Professor Hilal Ahmed needs no introduction. I feel humbled to make one, but as process and procedures demand, is a professor at CSDS India, is a mentor to many of us in terms of the work that he does, and he works on political Islam, Indian democracy, and the politics of symbols in South Asia. He's the author of A Brief History of the Present, Muslims in New India, the 2024 work. Allah Naam Ki Siyasat, 2023, Siyasi Muslims, A Story of Political Islams in India, 2019, and Democratic Accommodations, Minorities in Contemporary India, an edited volume with Peter on D'Souza and Sanjeer Alam. He also has edited Companion to Indian Democracy, Resilience, Fragility, and Ambivalence, and he also has a reader on Siddhartha Kaviraj. I would now request Professor Ahmed to make his presentation, and then we'll open up the floor for questions, discussions, comments, and hopefully we'll be able to take then a second round as well. But that is how we process moving forward. 20 to 25 minutes, but if you want to take more, we are here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jigyasa. First of all, thank you very much for having me. Second, that because of my request, you changed the schedule. I'm really grateful to you. And because we come from a society which is highly talkative, and I don't want to talk much. Rather, I would like to get engaged with certain questions which are puzzling all of us. So I think instead of me speaking and presenting the main argument, I will certainly present the main argument of the book. It would be better that if we all talk to each other, and I'm not here to respond what I have written, but here to think collectively about certain important issues. Uh, Sudipto Kaviraj has made a very interesting remark in the introduction of one of his collection of essays. It's called Imaginary Institution of India. He says that the authors are highly untrustworthy whenever it comes to talking about their own work. And he was not making a joke, he was serious. And I think many of you must have attended his lecture last year on Black Marxism, in which he somehow tried to develop that argument in a very interesting way. He said that a text could have two meanings. One, which is fashionable, that there is a fashion that we all say that a book can be read in a variety of ways, and he evokes Derrida for that. But then he also underlines something very significant. He says that the textuality of a particular text somehow, and especially the written word, somehow find some kind of an fixity. That there is something which is a common reference point for all different meanings. Most of the time, we look at the multiple meanings and somehow underplay that strange fixity, which is the reference point to evolve new meanings. I think that I take that as a point of reference. As I said that I'm the author, but you should not trust me. Instead, I take that point and revisit the question which actually led me to do this research. This was not my first research. The book, obviously, that was my first published book, but that was not my first research. Uh, I started, when we were in Delhi University, we had this option that in your MA, in the final year, you have this option to write a thesis instead of two papers, a short thesis. And at that point of time, we did not have any training of research. I was fortunate that I was taught by Professor Mahendranath Thakur, and he really shaped me a lot, even now. So he then, and because he was my teacher in BA, so we had some common interest, and one of the common interest was religion at that time, and especially the manner in which religion is manifested. So that question was somehow traveling with me when this opportunity came for me to do bit of research on manifestation of religion, and I did one uh, small dissertation for my MA. That somehow became the foundation, and in which I tried to understand the concept of political mobilization. I was interested in doing theory in a different way, and thanks to Professor Thakur, because he said that the universe is just outside the world of books. What we have to take questions which are, being asked by the society. We take these questions seriously and go back to uh, the books and try to look at how different people have tried to articulate different kind of answers to these questions. So that thing was somehow there in my mind, and that attitude towards research somehow encouraged me to develop that idea. So when it comes to manifestation of religiosity, and that too, and all of us were political scientists. So religion is obviously a matter of when it comes to conventional academic discourses. At that time, I'm talking about 90s. Religion was usually studied in relation to sociology. It was not, obviously, political science would have very different meanings at that time. Uh, and because I was interested in manifestation of that in the political realm, there was something which was crucial, and especially in Delhi, that Delhi is a very strange city. It's a strange city in two ways. One, it is a modern city, but at the same time, the historicity of this modern city somehow naturally comes to you. You need not to go to the past. Need not to go to any monument. Rather, the monument will come to you, and that too in a manner which is unexpected. Suddenly, you are crossing a road, and finally you encountered a building, which could be a mosque, which could be a tomb, and which could be a temple. And because I belong to Old Delhi, and if you travel Old Delhi of the 1990s or before that, it would be very difficult for you to identify a place merely by looking at the architecture. So, the structure of a temple, structure of a mosque, or a structure of a gurdwara is very similar. Only you can make a distinction between a place of worship, that is church, from a gurdwara or a temple or a mosque in Old Delhi. I'm not talking about the present day, but that is something which was there. So the manifestation of religiosity on the one hand, and the manner in which these questions were coming to us, especially with regard to historical monuments. And historical monument obviously is the subject of historians. So how should we deal with this in the realm of politics? That was a puzzling question. So I thought that it would be better that I should do with, my MPhil. That was my first serious attempt on text. There were two texts. One is very famous about Delhi's monument, that is in Urdu, that is called Asrau Sanadid by Sir Sayyid Ahmed Khan. And other one was a guidebook by EHN. It's called Seven Cities of Delhi. And I tried to look at the manner in which the past is presented to us in the realm of the book. And I was very disappointed the manner in which these texts are related to each other, and especially the post-colonial phase of that. So that was my research, and then when I went to and one good, obviously something very strange happened one day. We went to Vasant Kunj, and in Vasant Kunj there is a space. There is a very famous tomb which is called Sultan Gharika Maqbara. Now, this Sultan Gharika Maqbara is an interesting place because it has got a mosque, and in the basement there is a dargah, and dargah belongs to a sultan. What's interesting is that this dargah is protected by this dargah has its history because this dargah has got local communities treat it as a place of worship. Hmm? But the mosque is registered with Delhi Waqf Board. So you have in one complex, you have two sides. One is a dargah where the local community, mainly Hindus, are coming and offering their prayers. While there is a mosque over that basement, and it is registered with the Delhi Waqf Board. So if when we went there for the first time, I thought that it is permissible for me to offer prayer in the mosque. I was denied by the guard. That struck me, and I thought that why there is a very interesting conflict here. Then I tried to look at the story closely, and I found that there is a law by which all the places of all the historical monuments, if they are places of worship, are governed. And according to that law, the date of notification is very important. So if a surveyor is visiting a historical place and that is a religious site, and suppose some religious activity is going on, he or she will mark that, also freeze that religious activity and decide that that would be the religion of that very monument. So in Sultan Gharika Maqbara, it is basically a Muslim monument with uh, an activity called offering chadar to the grave, not offering namaz. So the law actually dividing religious places into two categories and fix them permanently. Now, because it is registered with Delhi, it was registered and even now it is registered with Delhi Waqf Board. It opens up an immense possibilities for doing politics of different kind. So I actually got interested into that, and that became my reference point for doing further research on this question. So this is the background in which I tried to situate my question. So very quickly, as I said that we are coming from a very talkative society, I would like to present you a few images and then I stop, and then I would like to have questions and again comments and questions, and we are actually discussing something serious, especially the new politics. The two questions were very central for all of us. One is, what happened to Muslim politics of heritage after 1992? Why it did not survive? And second, that is it all right to say that when we say Muslim politics as a discourse, it is only related to Muslims or not? So these are the two things which I am flagging. As a matter of fact, I would like to show you a few images and the main argument of the first version of the book. And the second, because, what is the nature of Hindutva politics of heritage? By the way, Hindutva politics of heritage is very much embedded in Muslim political discourse. Hindutva politics will not survive if it gives up the question of Muslim heritage. It is a central thematic concern for Hindutva politics of all forms. So I'll share my screen and I will actually uh, show you a few interesting images. So first of all, have a look at this. So yeah, yeah. So that's the first issue which I addressed in the book. There is a modern concept of monument, which is, and what is a monument? Monument must have three things. One, a site. Second, a story associated with it. And third, the manner in which you are going to commemorate that story. That makes a building a monument. So there is a difference between a historical monument and a historic building and a protected monument. Because the story associated with the monument will become important for the community which inherit that monument in the modern sense. But when we look at Islamic mode of commemoration, which are entirely different, so it's the same place on the left side, that's Kotla Frosha of 1880s, and on the right side, the same building where people are offering namaz. So both the public, it is obviously taken by a colonial photographer employed by the colonial authorities at that point of time. And the second picture is mine. So you can see that on the one hand that there is a past which is evoked as some kind of a rupture, which is presented to it as that it was is a symbol of a bygone era. But on the other hand, we have the same side, which is commemorated lively in a different way, as if that there is a continuity between past and the present. So that's the first issue which I have addressed in the book. Second is that how would you, when it comes to post-colonial India, how would you place Indo-Islamic buildings in the political, in the national discourse of national heritage? And this is a introductory history written at the entrance of Qutub Minar. And it says that the first paragraph says that this building was built by destroying 27 Hindu and Jain temples. I have made a film exploring this question, comparing this introductory history with the Persian plaque which is there in the at the entrance of that building. So the question is that how, it is a very interesting, by the way, these introductory histories written on every monument of national importance are crucial, because ASI at that point of time, especially in 1961 onward, all these things came in 1961. Why? Because in 1961, ASI celebrated its centenary year. And if you carefully look at the structure of this information, you find that who built what is reduced only to the first part of the first paragraph is basically who built what when, but the entire description is most of the technical type, so that the heritage can be, heritage, the idea of conflicts can be resolved and heritage can be accommodated in the nation building project. So that's the second issue which I have looked at. Now, third issue was political appropriation of Indo-Islamic building by Muslim groups, and I have taken up Babri Masjid and Jama Masjid as case studies. Again, a very interesting picture, Israeli flag at and that was when Israel-Lebanon war took place in early 2000. And this mosque is, by the way, is not a protected monument. Jama Masjid is not a protected monument. ASI usually gives some money to this person. And there is a very interesting story of this fellow. So if you want, I can come back to the story of this person, the Imam, the 11th Imam of this mosque, Abdullah Bukhari. So this is the framework. I have already explained that to you. Now this picture is interesting, the colored one. You know, Jama Masjid was actually closed down for regular prayers in 1987. Not merely that, the site of the mosque was used to make certain political demand directly, evoking what I called memory of a royal Muslim past. And it was the time, it's a very interesting time. On the one hand, you have got Ramayana and Mahabharata serial coming on your television virtually every day. And on the other hand, and BJP was using those television. Television was, there is a very interesting discussion in a book called Politics After Television, in which each episode of Ramayana is linked by a very interesting campaign by Delhi BJP. On the one hand, that was happening at that point of time in 1987-88. On the other hand, Jama Masjid was also became some kind of a political symbol in its own ways when the Imam started issuing farman, claiming that he is the authority. So on the one hand, you have got the figure of Lord Ram, again highly politicized through television as well as the political players. And on the other hand, the figure of Babar is also politicized in a very interesting way by the Muslim group. So they were actually addressing each other in a very interesting manner. And the figure, this particular building of Jama Masjid became very significant at that point of time. So there is a whole chapter on that. That is actually the story we all know about Babri Masjid. Because, what interesting in this case is that the Babri Masjid issue was linked directly to Jama Masjid by Imam in a very interesting manner. And that's the point when Babri Masjid Action Committee was formed. Remember that the Indian state was also redefining itself in the late 80s and early 90s. The task, after it was, liberalization was about to happen at that point of time. And the state started projecting itself as a mediating agency between competing interests. So that's why Vishwa Hindu Parishad became the representative of Hindus, and Babri Masjid Action Committee was recognized as the representative of Muslims. So I have looked at that. That was the first argument of the book. Muslim politics of monument actually demonstrate a major shift in the Muslim political discourse. This new kind of politics that evolved in 1970s focuses on the contested notion of Muslim architectural heritage and link it to the expanded meaning of constitutional right to worship. I've explained that with regard to that Sultan Ghari Ka Maqbara episode. This is the second argument, that legal constitutional discourse of secularism is accepted by the Muslim political group as a broad framework in which the element of official history and popular memory are strategically placed and redefined for articulating political demand. This argument is still valid because they still use legal constitutional framework to make political demands. And the final argument was that the political construction of a memory of a royal past transformed the local memories into a collective shared memory of a single Muslim community. Uh, this is, using public address system of Jama Masjid to make political speeches is one example. Dress code of the Imam is also important, because if you carefully look at these two images, you find that on the one hand, the image of a less educated Imam, this fellow was very intelligent fellow. He used to speak to the press wearing this dress in the 80s, which is a very media friendly image of a Muslim leader at that point of time. But if you look at his sermon, when he's delivering sermon, he was wearing robe, again symbolizing his status as a champion of Muslim cause, and that too in a historical manner. So I think I should stop here, and so we can have discussion.
Thank you so much for that crisp presentation and the pictures. Um, are there any questions at this point from the audiences? You can unmute yourself and introduce yourself in.
Hi, hello, Professor Hilal. I am Ishan. I worked on, among other things, on the recent Kashi Vishwanath corridor that was inaugurated in 2021 as part of my PhD. So I'll ask two broad questions. One that I had been pondering with since I did my PhD work, and also during that time also read your parts of your book. So one of the things that you've touched upon, and I think, you've also touched upon it, is when uh, monuments are appropriated for the purpose of nation building, but monuments, when associated with the community, also serve the purpose of forwarding the claim of the community to public spaces. So, if those monuments are appropriated in a nation building project, how does this interact with the claim of the community to public spaces in the country? So that is my first question. And secondly, it's a minor thing, but the point of strategically accepting secularism, that's true for mostly, for even the majority community. I mean, in the way that secularism is defined and enacted by the Indian state, it's also a very strategically nuanced way of doing it. Intercaste marriages aren't banned in India. So, how can we say that the interaction of Hindus with secularism is wholesale ideological commitment, not a strategic exercise? So, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Ishan. First is actually a comment, not a question. And as you said, I completely agree with you on that question. So there is no, obviously, you are absolutely right. And that contestation is something that produces politics. That whenever two modes of commemoration interact with each other, and when they interact, when obviously it is very easy to say that they interact or they come into contact with each other, but what is interesting is that this interaction is determined by a set of other things. For example, if you ask me, particularly in relation to Kashi Vishwanath debate, there are three very interesting elements which are crucial for that interaction. The first is legal issues. Second is that archaeological and the protectionist issue, where you have to protect and you have to conserve that particular building for what. So that is also important. And third is that, you know, all these sites are also used for political mobilization in a different way. We should not forget one thing, that all these debates are in India. We should not underestimate the role of elections. And these elections, the manner in which all these sites, when we say interaction, so these interactions are also governed by the logic of electoral politics in some senses. So to add to what you just said, I think we also have to look at the interaction of different commemorative practices and how these elements, which are the contextual element, produce new meanings to them and make them available for different forms of political mobilization. So that is one thing. And this is also, I agree with you about, not, I didn't say it's a strategic, but what I meant by saying that secularism is, obviously, it's not secularism, it's legal constitutional discourse. I'm at the moment working on the idea of political consensus, something which Rajni Kuthari started in the 60s and 70s. It is an interesting concept. Obviously, different political ideological formation will have different meanings of the constitution. And that's why the idea of constitutionalism is central. In my last book, I tried to unpack the question of constitutionalism. On the one hand, it's a normative concept, but on the other hand, constitutionalism is also a political concept. In what way you are going to appropriate the constitution. So it is strategic in that sense. And I agree with you that, uh, so don't, but I have a suggestion. The suggestion is very simple. When we say minority community, when we say majority community, we are talking about huge number of people. So I think we have to be very focused while using these terms. And my way of using it very simple. Muslim political groups. That's the expression I use throughout the book. And that's why I would say Hindutva groups, not Hindus. Because if you ask a common Hindu or a common Muslim, the meaning of secularism would entirely be different for many of these individuals. So therefore, we have to make a distinction between that. We are not speaking on behalf of these communities. Rather, we are trying to analyze those actors who claim to be to who claim to speak on behalf of them. So that's a suggestion.
Ishan, do you
Uh,
have a
th-
follow?
uh, Thank you, sir. If I have a follow-up, I'll think through it and
Thank
come
you.
back
Thank
with
you,
my
Isha.
reaction.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? No questions, no concerns. I have one, and maybe I'll give people some time to
Uh,
think through some of the things that you've
sure,
said.
sure, sure.
I found the interesting bit about the functional site versus the non-functional site, and how these are. And I think you kind of hinted at that when you were talking about the example of whether when you were not allowed to pray because it seemed like it was a, for the lack of better word, and you don't use that word hybrid, but I'm using it. It seemed like it was an hybrid uh, uh, monument. If you could, elaborate a little bit more for us the concept, because I found that very interesting in terms of dead sites and living sites, not similar to functional and non-functional sites as far as places of worship are concerned. And why am I saying that is because there's this recent um, conversation, debate, controversy about what are sites of prayer and where can prayer be offered? And this goes for all kinds of political groups, but also all kinds of religious groups which may not be political in the way that worship is extremely privately
Mm,
collective. So in that sense, is there a way in which the idea of functional and non-functional
mm.
uh, could be useful in terms of
Mm.
connecting this to what Ishan just said about the access of, say, a citizen to its public spaces.
See, first of all, I was very critical of this idea of the Western idea of monument. It is completely different from the way we understand our past, or especially the remains of the past. So if you go back to this archaeological debate, how how could you say, because there is an imagination, and someone like Koselleck, even Reinhard Koselleck, he's a philosopher of history. He would also, and that was very puzzling because I have a great respect for Koselleck's work, Futures Past, and his other things. And there is another person which I really enjoy reading it. His name is Ila Coruña. Uh, Ila Coruña is a fascinating figure because he's also a novelist. He's a Spanish novelist as well. Uh, his book is very interesting. It's called Moved by the Past. But both, even or for instance, in French tradition, you have an interesting figure called Pere Nora. All of these figures are actually, and they contributed significantly to the literature on monuments. But they always see the idea of monument as fixed and permanent. For us, not this is not the case. Why? For example, in the dominant religious philosophies of northern India, say for instance, there is a Hanafi tradition in Islam and dominant Brahmanical traditions. No one dies. So if I die, my ruh will be kept somewhere. So it means that the making of these tombs is not a monumentalization in the conventional Western sense. It was something to remember so that, and that's why in virtually every monument, you have a charitable act associated with that. For instance, I have a paper on Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal was actually, 7 or 8 villages were dedicated to run this place, and lot of charity happening. Very similarly, in that Sultan Ghari ka Maqbara, all of these buildings were meant for observing the life, not death. So therefore, this contradiction between functional and non-functional is important. It became crucial when the British came. So I will first would like to give you a historical argument, and then the question, because your question, the second question is very important. So when they came, they discovered and they also alleged that you people don't have a sense of history. And therefore, there is a need to protect these buildings. But they were also, after 1857, they became very, very sensitive about the question of religion. So they adopted a principle of strict neutrality when it comes to conservation. And according to them, that it would be useful that if we divide Indian building into two categories, functional and non-functional. And the functional building will be managed in accordance with the religion of that particular building, and the local community would be part of that conservation. So we will be only protected the outside building, not intervening in the religious activity associated with the building. But when it comes to a non-functional site, it would be actually protected as a dead monument. So that was the principle established by the colonial archaeological practices. We inherited that archaeological practices, interestingly, in post-colonial India. And despite giving right to religious observation, etc., constitutionally, it became a highly unresolved issue. Can I offer a namaz, which is a protected monument, and and the day when it was protected by the ASI, there was no activity going on. It was an unresolved question, legal question, and that question actually became a point of reference for the entire debate on Babri Masjid. So that is a historical political argument. But now the second question is a deeper question, that can we use that building for certain issues? I think that there should not be a hard and fast rule in determining the nature of that building. For example, very recently, and that is something which I have written in the second version of the book, there is a committee constituted by the Prime Minister of India, and that committee looked at the different historical monument which was protected by the Archaeological Survey of India. They came out with a report saying that there are more than 3,500 monuments which are historically insignificant, and therefore there is no need to maintain their status as a monument of national importance. Now, if you look at the legal side of it, a monument is not protected primarily because of its historical importance. It is also protected because it has got some artistic value. Art is also important. It also has got some archaeological value. So history is just one element by which you establish a link with the particular building. But if it is a monument, then its archaeological and artistic values also be taken into consideration. Now, this archaeological and artistic values are shared by all. And therefore, that's the problem with the initiative like Intac. They could not, they, on what they did. See, ASI focused entirely on the history part. Hmm? But the Intac focused entirely on the artistic part. So, as a result, religion, which was central to Indian communities, become irrelevant for Intac-like initiatives. And religion, which was a highly political thing, became important reference point for ASI, and that's the reason why ASI has always been used by the political groups. Not merely now. Nehru used it. See, in 1951, Nehru wrote a letter that we need to protect Muslim monument because they will be our best publicity to the world that we are a secular state. So therefore, the question of functional and non-functional are, it leads us to a highly debatable contextual moment. Now, in today's context, I would say that there should be a complete blanket ban on using historical monument for religious observance. Why? Because of the use of these buildings for certain political purposes. This is exactly what Nehru said in 1961. He said that we need not to allow people to offer namaz or puja, etc. We have to stop this because these are there are certain artistic and archaeological values. So if we fail to protect them, then the shared human values will be demolished. So, and it will be very parochial way to look at the question of history. So I think, right to worship has got certain limits. And therefore, if you carefully look at my first version of the book, you find that I have touched upon this question of right to worship because the Muslim group actually provoked Hindu groups that they should also do this. Very recently, Javed Akhtar made a very interesting remark. Javed Akhtar, being highly polemical, he said that now Hindus are becoming Muslims. And he's right. He's right. If you look at the politics of monument and heritage, there was no need to, offer namaz in protected monument. But there was a committee constituted by the Prime Minister of this country in 1984. This committee assured Sayyid Shahabuddin that all the protected monument will be open for namaz, etc. So I think that one must, so that became some kind of a template. So Bhojshala is not an isolated entity. It had some kind of a history associated with the larger debate that was going on. So, it is a contextual question. We have to decide on case to case basis that what would be the best way to resolve these conflicts.
Thank you so much. But I found that I found that conceptualization very interesting because I had actually not thought about it like that. I was actually looking at non-functional and dead as the same thing, and and that these could actually overlap. That had not come to me. So thank you, Ishan. I think you're raising your hand, but we also have uh, a, a, a mess.
I'll wait.
Yeah. So let me read that out for our audience as well as for Sir. So Hasina so Hasina, I'm introducing you also. She's a PhD candidate at Presidency University. She says, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I was wondering while conducting the research, how did you methodologically balance material culture, archaeology, architecture, physical space with textual or discursive data, political rhetoric, legal texts, public memory? Did you prioritize the monument as text to be read or the monument as arena where political mobilization occurs? Or what are the epistemological limitations of combining these two approaches, especially if they yield contradictory insights? A very method-centric
Very
question
good question,
to you,
Suhasini.
sir.
And it occurs to me as if that you are the examiner of my PhD thesis. So, but it's an important question. And I'm glad that you have raised this issue because this is a central issue for all of us as researchers. And you have articulated in a very good language that, we collect material, but obviously every researcher has to do bit of justice to the material which is coming to you. So the question of priority, it all depends on your location. Again, I'm referring to that lecture by Sudipto Kaviraj in JNU, where he made a very interesting remark about the concept of location. So he said that location is a highly it used in a very loose manner, that my location, who am I? So my location will keep changing. So when we say that I am a researcher, so even my researcher identity will keep changing. So therefore, the material which you collect, and when you material will become meaningful if you have a framework. So if you don't have a framework, then the because your framework will do two things. A framework will provide a methodological possibility to prioritize your material. That's the first thing. Second is that the framework will also determine the nature of the argument which you are going to extract from the material by reading it. So I did exactly the same thing because there was a lot of, it took me 2 years to understand the complex legal text, especially the colonial one. And once I, master it, and because, initially it is very difficult. It is difficult because it is written in a very strange, indirect language. All legal texts are written in such a way that you could draw your own meaning, but at the same time, certain procedural part should remain the same. So it took a lot of time for me to understand it. But when I actually uh, understood it, I realized that it will be it will be a central component of my framework because the legal issues will certainly lead to the political issue. So that was one thing. The second was that because this history memory divide was an important component of my methodological priorities, that you have to understand that obviously there is a fashion that now everything that is there in India is great. On the other hand, the Indian knowledge tradition or Indian knowledge system, etc. So somehow which I find quite disturbing, that the West, for example, I just said that I find Kosalik's Futures Past is not answering the question I'm raising. It does not mean that it is unimportant. So, therefore, some kind of an engagement with the literature that is available to you and the question you are encountering would be the third element of the framework. So if you construct that framework, then the priority of keeping the material, or which material should, what kind of element which I extract to make my argument more persuasive, would become easy. And that's the way I try to do that. uh, but I think it would be better if you read my method note in that book, both the method note, because in the first version, when I did the field work and linking that field work with certain broad historical theoretical questions, and this in the second version. And here I would like to say something about I'm not a historian. I'm a political scientist. So Sudipto Kaviraj has a very interesting take on this issue. He says that, historian, I decided not to write a new history of Indian monuments. No, rather, I was actually raising second order questions. And these second order questions are theoretical in nature. And that was the fourth element of my framework. So I think I would encourage you to read that. And thank you very much for asking me this very interesting. It would be, surprisingly, my examiner, PhD examiner, he did not ask this question. And I was actually wanted that this question must be asked. He asked because he was a trained historian. My problem was that when I submitted my PhD thesis, and that eventually, when I revised it, is not this is not the my PhD thesis was not there in the book. So, but it was a very technically written, sort of a theoretically nuanced and technically very perfect sort of a thesis. But my examiner, he did not ask me question. In fact, I remember my viva happened only for 5-10 minutes. So they were happy with the way I have tried to, did the one particular chapter in history or the contemporary history. But the question of this kind, which Swasni you asked, are critical. And we must ask this question to ourselves whenever we are doing research.
Thank you so much, Suhasini and Sir. Um, I think for a lot of younger friends here, some of them have just finished their undergrad degrees and are in their master's first year and hope to do academic work. I think both the question and the answer would help them start thinking when it comes to research.
Can I say something before? See, don't treat it like as if that we are here only to discuss things which are there in the book, because many of you haven't read the book. And when I had discussion with Jigyasa, I said very categorically that we can talk about it. So don't shy with asking questions. And there is no wrong question in this discussion. So if we, obviously, most of the time we find that what would be the right articulation of my anxiety. So don't get into that. Ask your anxiety, not question. And as I said, that we all are researchers. We belong to same community. So therefore it is, and I presented just a point of reference to unpack many questions which actually Jigyasa asked a fascinating question about what to do when the question of collective worship in a public space became a crucial issue. That is nothing to do with the book. It came out from the discussion. So don't shy, and I'm here for you.
Thank you so much. Very extremely encouraging, and feels like this is a safe and home space. There is a very long message in the chat box, and then there is another one that has just come up. So I will read the next question, but maybe Ishan will come to you, and you stay with us for a while. I'm increasingly sounding like this podcaster who keeps telling people to stay with us, but uh,
Acha.
there are there are more questions. So Sakshi, would you like to introduce yourselves also in the message? Says, I truly enjoyed the book and the presentation. It was accessible and comprehensive and helped broaden her understanding of memory, heritage, secularism, and discourse, Muslim political discourse. She had two questions. The book mentions about the self-protective nature of Muslim politics from 1947 to 70, which is mistakenly viewed as defensive, where you've also referred to Paul Truss. Can you please explain more on that?
Mhm.
The second question is, you've also highlighted the ways in which individual leaders gained power, whereby the state also played a role, while
Mhm.
community institutions took a back seat. Can it be argued that community institutions failed to be reflective enough to the interests of Muslim groups also
Mhm.
contributed towards the same?
Mhm.
Those are
Yeah.
two very pointed questions from
Very
the.
pointed question. Thank you very much for reading the book very carefully. If you remember that I am using brass, I find one thing interesting in brass, which I really like. In fact, two things. One is that, um, his way of his writing is fascinating. His style of writing is fascinating. I really like not the famous one, but there is another book by him. It's called Theft of an Idol, which is a fascinating book for me, and I learnt a lot from him, especially the creating your personal archives, because Braz had a wonderful way of keeping his record, especially the interviews. So I learned that from him. 1947 to 70 defensive Muslim politics. So my basic argument was this, that, why 1947 to 70, and especially in why it was defensive. Uh, because that was the time when electoral politics was taking certain interesting shape. First general election, after first general election, it became very clear that, and even before that, my book Siyasi Muslim has a long story that why Nehru was actually against the any kind of uh, uh, any kind of proportional representation. So, in that context, if you don't have proportional representation, if you don't have reservation of seats in jobs and in parliament and assemblies, so Muslim group found themselves completely in a very completely strange position. This is not, it does not mean that I'm talking about common Muslims. So you have to make a distinction that I'm talking about Muslim political elite. I'm not talking about common Muslims. Because even if there was some kind of a reservation for jobs in from 1940, no, from 1937 to 1948, Muslims had reservation in public jobs. सरकारी नौकरी जिसको बोलते हैं, Muslim had reservation. Hmm? And that reservation was also accepted by the first draft of the constitution. In 19, when we had first general election, when the second draft of the constitution gave that up, and it became, and only cultural rights were given to Muslims. Hmm? And most interestingly, the idea of minority was not defined. Even so, it means that Muslims were a religious minority, but at the same time, it was not clear that they were the only minority in the country, because they were linguistic minorities as well as other forms of minorities, cultural minorities as well. So, therefore, it was a completely different context in which you have to articulate yourself, or you have to develop your new language of politics. So, what would be the resource? As Ishan said, secularism, legal constitutional framework. That would be your resource. So I used Brass, and Brass's work from, he looked at the Urdu movement very closely. And he said that there were certain unwritten norms of politics evolved. And one of the unwritten norms of politics was that you can't do politics of religion, but because caste and language are acceptable categories for doing politics, Muslim elite, Sikh elite, and to some extent Hindu rightist, they also get into the politics of language. So in that context, when you are doing Urdu politics, you are not doing Urdu politics. You are doing Muslim politics, and you are doing Urdu politics in such a way that you defend yourself, and that's the reason why I argued that I like that framework, but I did not stop here. I learned a lot from Brass, but at the same time, I developed three unwritten norms of Muslim politics. So I would urge you to look at those three norms. The first norm is that there should be legal, Muslim politics would always be articulated in a language of law. Even now, it's a legal question. So every demand of Muslim political groups is always be presented to you in a language of law. The second norm of politics is, which I called Muslim homogeneity thesis, that we are one, and therefore there is a need to assert collective Muslim existence, and that Muslim existence would become meaningful only if we adhere to Muslim homogeneity. There are certain issues which are internal, and we will resolve them by ourselves. Therefore, the state is not allowed to enter in the inner domain of the community's life. That is the second unwritten norm of Muslim politics. The third and the most powerful norm of Muslim politics, which is being very interestingly redefined now, is that is called Muslim contribution thesis. That we have contributed a lot in the past. We had Taj Mahal, etc. And remember that these are the languages spoken by the Muslim elite, not common Muslims. Uh, and we are also playing a significant role in the nation building process. So we have Dilip Kumar, we have Naushad, we have Mughal Azam, and things like that. So all these soft issues will find some kind of resonance in making a norm of Muslim politics. All these three norms survived in different phases, and even now they are being redefined. So now, say for instance, Muslim associated with BJP or Muslim Rashtriya Manch would argue powerfully that we don't want any ticket to contest election. But the same people were asking more tickets, uh, evoking legal constitution now. So the Muslim Rashtriya Manch wala Muslims would say, and that's the argument. You know, yesterday there was a news item in one of the newspapers that their argument is that constitution is secular, and therefore a Hindu can also represent a Muslim. That is the so it means that politics keep itself alive always. So that's the reason why I thought that that is the first phase of Muslim politics could be described by emphasis on that. But 1970 was a radical, that was second phase where the radical Muslim politics started. Why? Because of Bangladesh, because Muslim Personal Law Board was established in 1972. Imam started giving fatwas in 1975. 1980s we had Babri Masjid, etc. And by 1990 that radical politics disappeared. Hmm? And the third phase started. That's an inclusion exclusion politics. Pasmanda became very important. And the fourth phase is actually now getting certain shape, and that's a nationalist Muslim politics. Every Muslim is asserting its nationalism. Muslim, I am when say every Muslim, meaning every Indian Muslim political leader would assert in Indianness, because nationalism is the dominant narrative of politics. So that's the answer to your first question. The second question is, again, you see, this community organization business is also political. So then don't get confused. Uh, for example, Muslim Personal Law Board was established in 1972, and no Muslim was asked to vote for them. They became, obviously it's a registered organization. I can register an organization and become All India. There was an umbrella organization which is called Muslim Majlis e Mushawarat, that established in 1964. Again, it was an organization established by a few individuals. So community, the term community institution or community organization is highly misleading. So they became, the recognition of the state to these organizations is crucial. One good day, suppose if they decide to, uh, suppose Modi invites me and he says that I would like to discuss Muslim issues with you, I would become some kind of a representative of Muslim. Why? Because of the recognition given to me by the state. So this struggle for recognition became a very powerful question, very powerful and debatable question in 90s, when there were two competing in late 80s, where there were two competing organizations. One was Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee, and one was the Babri Masjid Action Committee. And this action committee led by Imam of Jama Masjid, and Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee led by Sayyid Shahabuddin. And Shahabuddin fraction was supported by Chandrasekhar, and Imam Bukhari was supported by VP Singh. So, and after this Janta Dal collapse, they all became Congressy. So, when we say community organization, the recognition of state and the dominant political power is crucial. So therefore, and I'm glad that you read this book so closely. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for answering that question. Sakshi, if you have something else that you want to add, you can unmute yourself. We have Dhananjay Saha, who, if they could also introduce themselves as to that would be great. But they are grateful for listening to the lecture. The question is, how do you see iconography of archaeology, which is used as cultural site? Like in my university road, we see Muhammad Ali Park where Durga Puja occurred also. So the iconography around an archaeology is the question. And then Ishan, after Sir has answered this one, you can unmute yourself and ask your follow-up.
Yeah, Sakshi, any other question if you have, so just write in the textbook and we can come back to you. It's a big question. Thank you very much for this very interesting question of iconography. Uh, Again, you know, it all depends on how would you. One way is an organic way in which certain practices evolve. Hmm. Again, I would like to answer this question in two by evoking two different register. One is a theoretical register. As I said that I am a big fan of Ileko Runia. So Runia makes a very interesting point, and that is a very good point. He says that, and his entire work is basically on the question of rupture. And he says that representation and metonymy are two different ways of looking at and associated with the past. When I say representation, meaning that there are certain traces or certain symbols which are there, which reminds me of a very interesting past in some senses. So, for example, if you look at this Ashokan pillar at Firozshah Kotla, it reminds us that at one point of time, Ashokan pillar, Ashok was actually far away from Firozshah Tukla. So he took that and placed it here. So it would become a reference point. And I used to go and play cricket at that place. So I remember that. So whenever I go, I associate my cricket with that Ashokan player, with Firozshah Tukla. So that very player would become some kind of a reference and some kind of a representation. So Runia would say that this is some kind of a representation, is a representational mode where one icon is representing something bigger and taking me back to my own memory structures. That's the way I would see uh, is it I'm audible?
We lost you for good 15 seconds. So
Okay,
you
let
have to
me.
you Firozshah Kotla, you used to go there and play there, and after that we have to
Okay, see,
listen to you
Runia
again.
would say, okay, yeah. So let me just repeat what I was saying. So Runia would say that, that would be a representation, the history in representation, because that pillar would reminds me of my childhood. Hmm. So that is one way of connecting with the past. So that is an icon, and that icon is related to me. But there is another way where there are certain things which I have even in my childhood never noticed. Hmm. But these things were continued, and at certain point of time, because I did not notice them and there was no association with them, so whenever they would come to me, it would affect my sense of history or my sense of belonging to a certain era. So I'll give you one example. When we were young, that was the time when Amitabh Bachchan was dominating film industry, and we had a great respect for him. We admire him. He was our hero. And Amol Palekar, we used to hate him. because we did not like him. Hmm. But after some time, there are certain songs which we never liked. But when these songs are played, you get into something else. These are not representation. This is, Runia says, it's a metonymy. So you connect something which is complete rupture, but then it reminds you something serious. Now, that is one way, that there is an organic way to linking with the past. So the icon is not necessarily representative. It could be something which was there but unnoticed, remained unnoticed. But certainly it become crucial at one point of time, and it would start making you uh, make you feel as if that you have lived that era, etc. So that is called rupture. There is certainly a rupture, but that rupture is also, that is a discontinuity and rupture, but it is linking to it. So the thing is that when it comes to iconography or symbol, there are two things which we must understand theoretically. One is the capacity. Obviously, symbols, I need not to explain what a symbol is, but the capacity of the symbol is also crucial. Uh, See, capacity of the symbol is that, for example, there's certain in the transformation of an item into a symbol is very important. There's a lot of literature in arts that why certain the manner in which a symbol becomes a symbol. So, but in my view, there is certain characteristic, and I would qualify that characteristic in relation to the capacity of that very object to become a symbol. So there are certain ways in which a symbol would become an item become a symbol. So it all depends on the capacity of that. For example, that iconography you are referring to, because I haven't seen that, could be uh, could be could be associated, could have some kind of, you know it's difficult, I, because I haven't seen it, so I can't, I should not be making any comment on that. But I can understand what you are saying, that there is a need, certainly a need, to look at the capacity of the of that item to become a symbol. Again, without looking at that, I won't be in a position to make any comment on that. But that's the way I understood this question.
Thank you, sir. Very interesting, and probably Dhananjay is introducing himself, if I'm using the right pronouns, PhD research scholar at Department of Political Science, Presidency University. I was thinking of how certain items remain dormant for most parts unless a certain political context charges them up to a certain iconography. And Ambedkar's portraits and pictures on very massive citizenship protests, CA and RC protests that happened. I think there was a certain way in which Ambedkar became available. I'm just thinking out loud here from what you said about the capacity of an item to become a
Mm.
symbol in a particular context. Then we have another long question by Sneha. If I'm not wrong, Sneha is the PhD scholar at uh, Zurich, if I'm not wrong, but she should introduce herself as well. Thank you for your presentation, Professor. And I think she's also thanking me with the D for organizing this talk. Fascinating to hear and engage with your work in articulation in Muslim politics. I recently read a book on technopolitics and political articulation, where the author compares the two different forms articulated by Abul Kalam Azad versus Aziz Burni. Even though the two of them were addressing the Muslims in the Indian nation, the articulations resulted in very different outcomes because the speech acts from both these leaders resulted in a very different politics on ground. In contemporary era, where elections are being held in the name of anti-Muslim rhetoric, how do you think the QOM should be addressed Oh, she means calm. Calm. I was reading it as calm. Calm should be addressed. One that leads to its recognition and representation, not just descriptively, but substantively.
Substantively, because this is, a very good question, and I have tried to answer very similar, not the way in which she has asked this question. uh, the question of Muslim identity, I have, looked at that question um, in my book, Brief History of the Present, where I am making a distinction between substantive Muslimness and the discourse of Muslimness. So, the substantive Muslimness is something that is constituted at the bottom level of society. So, issues such as caste, your economic background, your gender, these issues actually determine the manner in which your self-perception determine, but at the same time, how you are being seen by the context in which you live as Muslim. That is substantive Muslimness. And that is one part of the calm, which is here reflected in the question. But there is an equally powerful discourse of uh, Muslimness, where Muslims are seen as a member of a religious minority. They are seen as a threat to the nation. Their collective existence is seen that as if that they are behaving in a very similar manner in politics. So that is a discourse of Muslimness. So it could be positive, it could be negative. So there is an interesting overlap and interaction between this discursive Muslimness and the substantive Muslimness. What, again, so I should stop here, not because, in this question, there is a temptation that one should actually go further and say in election, this should be the right answer. No. Why? Because at the moment, if you ask me honestly, the discourse of Muslimness is dominating and it is actually redefining the substance in a significant way. But if you go back to, say, for instance, 19 or early 2000, when inclusion exclusion debate was happening in this country, substantive Muslimness was one of the element by which even the discourse of Muslimness was being redefined. Such a commission report was constituted at that point of time. In fact, there were two people in the parliament. They were talking about Pasmanda issues. It means that the overlap between substantive Muslimness and the discourse of Muslimness, it is a contextual question, and one should actually. That's the reason why I restrict myself. I don't want to go further. This is a theoretical proposition which I offer, and it should be seen in relation to the ongoing political processes. We also have a temptation to go back to the past. For example, as I said that, for example, in this question, Azad, Maulana Azad passed away in 1957. He didn't know that after 4 years of his death, Muslim Majlis-e Mushawarat would be formed. So Maulana Azad could be a reference point for us, but he should not be exaggerated to find out the answers, especially redefining what the Qawm is, what the Muslim nation is. So, therefore, in my work, I have also looked at, say, for example, two or three in my Hindi book. I have looked at Sayyid Shahabuddin. I have looked at Ali Anwar. I have looked at other post-colonial political uh, figures. Let me just put my laptop on charging. Just a moment. They were giving different answer to this question of Muslimness and how to define Muslim community as a nation in different contexts.
Thank you, sir. We've not, at least I haven't read that book, so maybe it's time to go
Yeah.
and check that workout. Ishan, you had a follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something that I wanted to share since the discussion came on in TAC. During my work, I also had the opportunity to interact with officials of the intact Banaras subdivision office. Uh, the organization played a very interesting role there in the construction of the Kashi Vishwanath corridor because they were brought in the discussion to basically rubber stamp the relocation of smaller temples that were removed from their original site. And it's a very interesting, it was very interesting also because in Banaras, the entirety of Intact are either rich businessmen who are also Hindu or high priests with very powerful commanding positions in the city. This was I just wanted to share that because a lot of the time the role that very few organizations, I think it's important also for us to perhaps think through it because very few organizations actually exist that have the ability to navigate away from electoral and institutional political forces when applied in that way. Most of them end up willingly becoming rubber stamps. So that's something that I just wanted to share. I hope it is useful for
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you, Ishan. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it happens.
Thank you, Ishan. And there is there is another. I was actually trying to close the session because it's already 5:30, but there is a question of hello Jigyasa. I'm Naveen Hamdani. I'm presently serving under JK government as JKS officer. And the question I think for Sir is how can Indian Muslims move beyond being viewed merely as a political category and reclaim a more diverse social and intellectual presence?
Difficult question. This is the question which I have addressed in my book. Uh, See, I always make a distinction as a researcher between two things. What is and what ought to be. So I am very much interested. Usually we think that we know, but we don't know the technicalities. Like what I presented, it took me 20 years to gather all the material and understand it. So this is an ongoing thing which I would like to, but there is a temptation. The temptation is whenever a question of this kind coming to you, you tend to answer so quickly. For me, this is an important question, and this question opens up a new possibility of research. Since I have not done research on what ought to be done, then it is difficult for me to answer this question. But I have my own individual opinion. But who am I? I don't treat myself as, I don't take myself very seriously. So therefore, I think I should not answering that temptation. But at the same time, I would like you to read the report which we have published, in which we proposed an action plan. The report was funded by US India Policy Institute. It is called Rethinking Affirmative Action for Muslims in Post-Colonial India. I was the lead researcher along with two other lead researchers in that study. And that is perhaps the most important study after such a commission report that was constituted in 2007. We looked at the question of the new emerging policy framework. We also looked at the affirmative action policies introduced by the state after 2014, especially when BJP was in power. And after considering all these issues and especially the nature of economy, it's a market economy thing. Remember that one of the biggest mistakes such a commission committed was basically to propose something in an environment that is governed by the open market competition economy, the market related economy. And all their proposals were basically related to what should the state do. That's why there was a lot of imbalance in the report. Similarly, Rangnath Commission report was also problematic because they relied heavily on the debate on representation. Remember that the Muslim representation debate died down after 1950. It actually became very different debate after 1950 when inclusion of Muslim became crucial. So, considering all these, we proposed an action plan. And in that action plan, there are 8 or 10 points which were listed, that what should be the role of state, what should the state do, what should be the engagement with the private sector, especially CSR, what would be the capacity building attitude or capacity building measures taken by Muslim organization. So that's a comprehensive action plan. So I would like you to read that report where we have actually did some work to indicate that what ought to be the direction, not what would be the action plan. It was a proposed action plan. So as I said that, usually we have a temptation to say, ऐसा ऐसा होना चाहिए. I don't want to get into that because I am not a representative of the community. I am a researcher, I'm a professional researcher. So that professional identity must be kept intact.
Thank you so much for that answer. But I also think that this is a very important concern, question, and also a very real anxiety that not just people who identify as Muslims, but also those who would want to be part of a politics of kindness and of fraternity. And I think maybe through our research, as you've opened up several questions, maybe in terms of that, maybe even if it takes us another 20 years, what ought to be is also not a bad question
Absolutely.
to pick up. So
No, Jigyasa, absolutely. I
yeah,
completely agree. But that would be a different self.
yes.
When I am not representing Muslim at the moment. So that would be one. The second thing is that, uh, you know, whatsoever happening in the country should not be seen the manner in which it is presented to us. For example, anti-Muslim violence, for example, lynching, etc. Now, and I'm giving you a very bad example. It's a bad example, and one should not compare one kind of violence with another kind of violence. Look at we have just finished a study of there's a content analysis of newspaper of 1 year and looking at how certain things are reported. And we found that actually violence against women increased enormously in the country. We also found, and our finding was confirmed by National Crime Bureau data, we also found that violence against Dalit has increased tremendously. We also observed that the nature of violence in the society increased tremendously. And if you ask me, what is the central problematic question in our contemporary life is disparity question. Until and unless these questions are linked to the Hindu-Muslim divide, we won't be get proper answers. So what should Muslim do? I think is inextricably linked to what the poor do, poor people of this country do. So usually we think that, and there is I would like to evoke Marx here. He says, and he makes a very interesting distinction. This is a very powerful distinction. This is actually when he says class for itself and class in itself. That's an important issue. We know and we expect that all the deprived section of society would come together, but that's an imaginary possibility. If you ask me and look at our data, election data, you find that most of the deprived section of society would admire, uh, you know, rich and wealthy people in this country. So, are they behaving like a class? No. And that's why Gramsci became crucial, that it is a revolution. Revolution is certainly happening, but now not an active one. It's a passive one. So it is a passive one, but the specificity of that passive revolution require some detailed assessment. So that's why that ought to be question is a serious question. And we must actually address that question. Does not mean that we ignored it, but it should be addressed the way Gandhi did. मेरे सपनों का भारत नहीं, बिकॉज हमारे देश में यू whenever you start मेरे सपनों का भारत, people will endlessly speak about what ought to be done. That's why it should be qualified with certain norms.
Thank you so much, sir. And I'll borrow your phrase from your first book, which says "being from being to becoming." And I think there's a discussion on Gramsci there when you're talking about the idea of Muslimness and Muslim political groups. On that very optimistic note on the possibility of Gandhian politics and the possibility of making sense of claims, but qualitatively making sense of claims. I would now, uh, you know, come declare that this session is now closed. We've already crossed the 5:30 mark. We had a very good discussion. We learned so many new things today. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out your precious time for the small group of us, young scholars, researchers who are trying to make sense of academics in the world. Thank you so much for your time. On behalf of the DAAK team, DAAK Baithak, all my team members and participants here, I would like to extend a very heartfelt, warm gratitude to you. And I would also like to thank all our participants, especially those who came and asked questions and who are engaging in these conversations. Thank you so much. And on that note, I wish all of you a very good week coming forward. It's only Tuesday today. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank, thank you, sir. Thank you.